Ian Garry versus Carlos Prates is a week away, and this main event is not as close as you may think. And I am here to break down not only the main event, but every single fight on this card. I'll be doing my predictions, and this is a very solid card. It's not the best fight night, but it is a very decent, solid fight night card. Anthony Smith, I think this is his retirement fight versus Zhang Mingyang. We've got the worst gas tanks in UFC history going head-to-head in Michel Pereira versus Magomedov. Ikram Aliskerov, Andre Muniz. That's a good fight. A lot of good fights on this card, and we may as well get into it. But before we get into it, I just wanted to say that if you guys are trying to get in shape for the summer and you don't know what to do in the gym and you're a beginner and you want to put on some mass this summer, all right? Or if you've already started lifting but you want to lean out a little bit, you can check out my beginner program and the Real Food Cookbook. The Real Food Cookbook is for people that want to stay lean, stay in shape while eating tasty comfort foods made with whole and unprocessed ingredients so that you don't have to go on a miserable, boring diet. So if you guys are interested in any of these fitness products, you can check them out. The link is in the description. Make sure to use code MMA for 30% off. As we get to Chelsea Chandler versus Joselyne Edwards, this is a badass fight, man. Joselyne Edwards, sort of like the Leon Edwards of the WMMA division, and Chelsea Chandler just looks like a really tough cookie. I would not want to mess with her. This is going to be a banger. I'm going to go with Chelsea Chandler. You know she's going to walk out to something like bad to the bone. You know she's going to walk out to something like that. Joselyne Edwards is going to have that kickboxing style. She's going to have the very serious face, and she's going to throw one little pritzy, flimsy kick every once in a while. Chelsea Chandler is going to be there throwing hammers at 15 feet distance, and every once in a while she's going to try to shoot a takedown. I'm going to go with Joselyne Edwards. That record of 14-6, that's a lot more experience. I think she's going to win. She seems to be slightly leaner as well, so she'll probably be a little bit faster, stronger. So I'll go with Joselyne Edwards to win this one. But let's get on to the next one. Timothy Cuamba versus Roberto Romero. Roberto Romero gave David Onama a really tough scrap, actually won the first round against Onama, and that was his UFC debut, and that's a tough task for your UFC debut. Whereas Timothy Cuamba, he's not looked that great. You know, in his UFC debut, I believe he fought Blackshear, who was coming off of the Contender Series with a big KO, and everyone expected Blackshear to be like, you know, a seriously good finisher, KO artist type of fighter, and Timothy Cuamba took him to a split decision, and it was a little bit of a lackluster fight, but people were saying, oh, if he took Blackshear to a decision, that must mean he's pretty good. But since then, Blackshear's not been that great. Since then, Timothy Cuamba's just gone to decisions and pitter-pat fights, and Roberto Romero, he lost his last fight, but he lost it by decision and hung in there with a very dangerous, you know, explosive fighter in David Onama, who eventually, I think he may have even taken that on short notice as well. And, you know, he got taken down in the end of that fight and got beat up a little bit, but first UFC fight, high-level competition, dangerous opponent, and still won the first round, showed toughness, showed that he can impose his will, has some power. I'm going to pick Roberto Romero based on, I believe he's the grittier fighter that's going to impose his will in the cage. I think he's dangerous. I think he has some pretty good inside pocket boxing as well. So I'm going to go with Roberto Romero to win this by a decision or a TKO. Polyana Viana versus Jacqueline Amorim. I am going to go with the 9-1 Jacqueline Amorim. And people were going to say, casual man, you're not picking Polyana Viana, man. She, you know, we know who she is, and she's a legend, man. Everyone loves Polyana, man. But, yeah, 9-1 record. That's what you got to go with for WMMA. So, you know, I mean, this is case closed. Let's get on to the next one. Malcolm Walker versus Cameron Saaimon. This is actually a really interesting fight. Malcolm Walker, Dana White Contender Series alum. You see him. You see the gray tint, the and one basketball shorts. You know, back in the day, they used to have like the red or the blue Dana White Contender Series shorts with the Dana White Contender Series logo. Now everybody gets and one shorts. They go back to 2010, 2009. And of course, 1-0 record, that classic 1-0 record that the UFC website just cannot get correct. He's actually, I believe, 8-1 or 8-0. Malcolm Wellmaker, what an interesting last name. Malcolm Wellmaker is about to make a well out of Cameron Saaimone's tears. No, I'm just joking. But listen, this is interesting because Cameron Saaimon is coming off of a loss, and a brutal one at that, to Peyton Talbot, who just walked him down with absolutely no respect, no regard for Cameron Saimon's power, just bullied him around. He seemed to be the much bigger, denser fighter in there. Cameron Saaimon, even though he's in shape, he's not the smallest bantamweight. He certainly is not a big bantamweight, all right? He's got a smaller frame. He's not that powerful. He's not that dense. He's fast and he's well-rounded. He's got good kickboxing and he's got good grappling. He's got a good pace. He's tough as nails. Even though he got dropped and knocked out in his last fight against Peyton Talbot, we know Peyton Talbot has heavy hands. But he's super tough. He's super game, trains with Dricus. Everyone at that gym is very tough and gritty. But this is an interesting fight because Malcolm Wellmaker is a KO artist. Malcolm Wellmaker, I believe he's a southpaw. Is he a southpaw? They're not showing if he's a southpaw. But Malcolm Wellmaker is going to have the reach advantage. He's going to have, I think they're both 5'8", so they're the same height. But he's a southpaw, I believe, and he's got a nasty straight left hand and a left overhand as well. And he's knocking a lot of people out, man. So Cameron Saaimon is up against the second power puncher that he's faced. The first 2 or 3 guys that he fought in the UFC didn't have a lot of power, but Malcolm Wellmaker is very confident. He's, as I said, maybe undefeated or maybe only has 1 loss, but has a ton of KOs, and that overhand is nasty. Now, maybe we'll see Cameron Saaimon go in there with cleaner defense, and maybe we'll see him with a wrestling-heavy approach. But again, this is a big test because the last time he fought a power puncher in Peyton Talbot, and I don't think Malcolm Wellmaker is as good as Peyton Talbot, but he might have the same amount of pop. So it's a tricky fight to pick. Man, I want Cameron Saaimon to win this fight. So I'm trying to find a way to pick him here. But I think Malcolm Wellmaker might win this, guys. I think Malcolm Wellmaker might get this one done by a KO. He just has a really slick overhand, a good straight left. He has a lot of power, and I think he's skilled enough to land it. I don't know what the odds are for this fight. I just have a feeling. I got a feeling that Malcolm Wellmaker is going to win this. I'm rooting for Cameron Saaimon. I like Saaimon. I like, he's like a mini Dricus 2+C with no pop. I want him to win this fight, man, but I'm going to go with Malcolm Wellmaker. This might be a really bad pick. We could see Cameron Saaimon take him down and just beat him up. But I just don't think he's dangerous on the feet. And I have a feeling that, a lot of these up-and-coming prospects just have decent takedown defense usually these days. I think if Malcolm can keep this on the feet, I think he's going to find a big KO shot. So I'm going to pick him to win this fight. I'd imagine Cameron Saaimon is the favorite, but Malcolm's pretty good, so I'm going to pick him to win this one. Damon Blackshear versus Alatengheili, the Mongolian Knight. He's a marauder. Typical marauder build, marauder head, and Damon Blackshear, he's one of these slower twitch grapplers, but he's very dangerous, right? Damon Blackshear, I think he lost to Mario Batista that beat him? I believe it may have been Mario Batista, or maybe someone else. There's a bunch of Mario Batistas at bantamweight. But I think Damon Blackshear is going to win this one. He's coming off of 2 wins in a row, both by submission. He's very strong once he gets you on the ground. Has a good squeeze, has a good head and arm triangle, man. He's got all of the strength-based submissions at bantamweight, and it is pretty rare to see, someone with Damon Blackshear's level of submission ability in the bantamweight division. And I don't think that Alatengheili, who is pretty much a striker for the most part, he's not like a super well-rounded fighter. I don't think he's at the level that I'm going to pick to be able to deal with the grappling. And I don't think he's as dangerous on the feet as he would need to be for someone that doesn't have great grappling, for me to rely on them to be able to just blow Damon Blackshear out of the water with a KO early on. So I'm going to go with Damon Blackshear. I think he takes down Alatengheili, and I think he'll probably get the submission in like the first or second round. So, yeah, Damian Blackshear by submission as we get on to Chris Gutierrez versus John Castaneda. John Castaneda, dude, like there must be like 50 John Castaneda types in the UFC. You know what I mean? Like they're always featherweight, bantamweight, John Castaneda. Let me see if there's another one. Timothy Cuamba, dude. There's like fucking 50,000 of this type of fighter. He's like good. Some hardcore fans will be like, John Castaneda's an absolute legend, man. Like these are like the legendary fighters. If you were to freaking dare say that I actually don't really know John Castaneda too much, man. I'm not too familiar with him. There's a group of the fan base that would call you a casual on the spot. If you're like going through the fights and you're saying Gutierrez versus Castaneda, yeah, I mean, I haven't really watched a lot of Castaneda fights. I don't really remember a single one. Instantly, dude, you don't remember John Castaneda's last fight to a T? You don't remember every strike that was thrown? You're a casual. I'm sorry. John Castaneda is one of these fighters where you don't remember a single one of his opponents until you check his record. And you don't remember a single exchange that he's had in his career until you check his record. I know he's coming off of a win. I know he's decent, man. I know that there's going to be some John Castaneda. John Castaneda is the type of fighter that has a hardcore fan base that's composed of 10 people. And then there's 100 people that'll be like, dude, all jokes aside, the fact that you're not a John Castaneda fan shows you're a casual. There's like 100 people like that. And then there's like 500 people that are like, bro doesn't know John Castaneda, man. I know John Castaneda. He's fought like 5 or 6 times in the UFC. He's got a couple L's, got a couple wins. He's not the most dangerous fighter. You know, this is the thing. I hope John Castaneda goes out there and flatlines Chris Gutierrez. I really do. I wish nothing but the best for John Castaneda. I want him to go from, you know, your typical run-of-the-mill featherweight fighter that you don't really know to someone that we he knocked this guy out. But Chris Gutierrez is a tough test. Not only is Chris Gutierrez tough, but he's also just tough. He's a tricky customer, literally. He's the trickiest customer to deal with in the featherweight division, maybe. Unless you have a lot of takedowns. Now, John Castaneda does have wrestling, which makes this interesting because the way to beat Chris Gutierrez is to take him down, and he doesn't have great takedown defense. He's like a worse version of Yair everywhere, even when it comes to the wrestling defense. And he has a similar kicking style. Never really risks anything on the feet, will never slug with you in the pocket, will never throw a big punch, sits behind a jab and flicks oblique kicks, front kicks, leg kicks. Joe Rogan had a phase where he was glazing Chris Gutierrez as like the next big thing after he knocked out old man Frankie Edgar. You remember that when Chris Gutierrez knocked out Frankie Edgar? And I think O'Malley went on the Joe Rogan podcast like a week later, and Joe Rogan was trying to seem like the guy that knows what's going on by glazing a relatively new name that people are just finding out about, that he was like claiming to be the dark horse of the division. He was like, Chris Gutierrez, man. Whoa, what about Chris Gutierrez? I remember Joe Rogan was like the biggest Gutierrez fan just to prove that he was a hardcore fan. But he's not that dangerous. I mean, against anyone that's not a completely old man, he's not that dangerous. He just doesn't hit that hard. The thing is, can John Castaneda close the distance to take him down? I don't know. I think Chris Gutierrez is good enough to be able to beat the John Castanedas of the world, and I think he'll probably win this by a pitter-pat decision on the back foot. So I'm going to pick Chris Gutierrez, but I'm rooting for John Castaneda to prove me wrong, okay? As we get on to Evan Elder versus Ahmad Hassanzada. Hassanzada is an absolute monster, okay? Not only is he coming off of the Dana White Contender Series rocking the and one shorts, but he's got the farmer's tan, man. He's got the farmer's tan. He's got the, UFC 4 tattoo, which is interesting. And then Evan Elder is just an absolute monster, man. Evan Elder. It's interesting how like the UFC can't render a complete record for the Contender Series alum, but they'll always render if there's a draw or a loss somehow. Like, they'll only keep up with the losses. So, yeah, I'm going to go with Evan Elder, though. I mean, Ahmad, he's not that great. I'm going to go with Evan Elder to get this one done by a decision, man. As we get on to Jimmy Flick. Dude, okay, guys, if you're interested in my full breakdown, then it's on the boxing channel, okay? I actually did a 1 hour breakdown on that. That's why I'm laughing. But let's get on to Jimmy Flick versus Matt Schnell. This is tough to pick because Matt Schnell has no chin, and he's like the easiest guy to KO in the flyweight division, but Jimmy Flick has no KOs in flyweight and has no power. And really, his way to win fights is by taking people down and submitting them. Now, Matt Schnell's been submitted before. He's been taken down, but I feel like he's at the level where he has some decent grappling defense. The way to beat Matt Schnell is to hurt him and then submit him or just knock him out in general. But Jimmy Flick is not very dangerous on the feet. But the thing is, does it really take much to knock Matt Schnell out on the feet? And Matt Schnell has some pop, but, you know, he's not the most dangerous guy. I wouldn't even consider him a glass cannon because I don't know if he's much of a cannon in this division. I know he's had a couple of KOs, but I'm going to go with Jimmy Flick, dude. I think that I think a small punch could ruffle the feathers of Matt Schnell, and I think that Jimmy Flick could probably, you know, find some sequence where he could hurt him, take him down, get some control. I'm going to go with Jimmy Flick to win this one based on just being more durable, having decent grappling. As we get on to Ikram Aliskerov versus Andre Muniz, this is actually a really interesting fight because Andre Muniz is actually low-key a tricky customer. He's always been seen as someone that's very one-dimensional, but I actually think his striking is very underrated. Not only does Andre Muniz have a crazy reach for his height, he's only 6'1", which is, you know, not short, but he's 6'1". He has a 78-inch reach, which is crazy for middleweight with his frame. And it gives a lot of people issues, like even Jung Young Park, the Iron Turtle, who's an absolute marauder, who's an absolute savage, who usually just trucks his way forward and just gets into the pocket easily, had a really difficult time on the feet with Andre Muniz. Really couldn't find his shots and was just at the end of Andre Muniz's punches, his long, rangy strikes. And Andre Muniz was winning the striking exchanges relatively comfortably in that matchup. But Ikram Aliskerov is the big power puncher, right? He actually has a decent reach as well. He has a 76-inch reach, but he doesn't fight like a long-rangey guy. You know, he's got a little bit of that weird, you know, pep in his step, man. Robert Whittaker. You know, Whittaker usually does the Irish jig when he gets hit. Ikram Aliskerov did the chicken dance when he got hit by Robert Whittaker, and it's not a good sign when Robert Whittaker's knocking you out. Even though, to be fair, Whittaker just hit him with a really good shot. I know Whittaker's not known for his power, but he doesn't have no power. Ikram coming off of a KO loss. Can Andre Muniz find the inside, you know, hefty strikes that Whittaker was able to find? And Whittaker's pretty explosive. I don't think he can. I think it's likely that Ikram Aliskerov doesn't get KO'd with, you know, pocket boxing of Andre Muniz. But I do think that Andre Muniz can outstrike Ikram Aliskerov on the outside. I think he can actually win those exchanges. Muniz is not a guy that has no chin. We don't really see him get rocked a lot or knocked out. So I know Ikram has a lot of power, but he's not really been, you know, showing us anything on the feet with like high-level strikers. Because let's be honest, before the Whittaker fight, he fought people that weren't very good at all, right? Like he fought Worley Alves and a bunch of other guys that aren't very good, right? No chin, Phil Hawes. It'll get interesting when it comes to the grappling, okay? Because Ikram has very good grappling, good takedown defense. Khamzat Chimaev struggled to get him down back in the day, couldn't even get him down, which is very impressive. Ikram is known for his good offensive grappling, but I believe it took him 3 rounds to finish Dennis Tillulin. And I know that I believe in Tillulin, you know, and I still believe Tillulin could be a champion. But Dennis Tillulin is like one of the worst grapplers in middleweight division's history, and that's not a great look. But that was a while ago, and fighters can improve, and Ikram is much better, I bet, now. But I don't see him out-grappling Andre Muniz. Maybe he could. Jung Young Park was able to beat up Muniz on the ground a little bit. Muniz would ragdoll Jung Young Park. He really just had the body lock, and he was just like swinging him around because he had the strength advantage and did absolutely nothing with it. And then at the end of the rounds, Jung Young Park would get out of the bad positions, reverse position, get on top, and then he would get really close to finishing Andre Muniz with ground and pound. Maybe we see Ikram Aliskerov, if he has good ground and pound, finish Andre Muniz. But Muniz is a very good grappler. He's a strong grappler. I think this is a winnable fight for Muniz. I really do. But then again, man, even Paul Craig finished this guy on the ground. Muniz does not have a good ground game off of his back. You know, there was at one time people were saying this guy submitted Jacare off of his back. You know, he's a fucking monster, man. But that was old man geriatric Jacare Souza. I remember people hyped him up so much for that win. But I knew it was just like, he's a good grappler, but Jacare is just old as fuck. It's not that impressive. I think Muniz is going to win the striking exchanges, but I think Ikram Aliskerov will welcome the grappling, and I think his wrestling base will allow him to get top position, and I think that he'll actually be able to land some ground and pound. So I'm going to go with Ikram Aliskerov. Paul Craig is a good grappler, but, you know, it's not like he just got a submission, a Hail Mary submission, which is usually what he does best. He straight up just beat the shit out of Andre Muniz on the ground, and Paul Craig's not really known for his ground and pound and all that. So I think that there are some holes in Muniz's ground game. And I think Ikram Aliskerov, I could see him, again, with his wrestling, getting dominant position, ground and pound, doing damage. I'll go with Ikram Aliskerov. I just think it'll be interesting on the feet. I think Muniz will give him some trouble. As we get on to Randy Brown, I guess I'll say Ikram Aliskerov by decision. Randy Brown versus Nicolas Dalby. And also, dude, Andre Muniz outstruck Brendan Allen, which is very impressive. This is an interesting fight as well. Dalby, 40 years old, but he's still giving people that are really good fits. Like, he finished one of the Bonfim brothers, which is very impressive, broke him after losing the first round. I mean, that's Nicolas Dalby's style. He's able to be the hammer. I'm sorry, he's able to be the nail. He'll take a beating early, he'll weather the storm, and because his gas tank is so good and his pressure is so good, people just break under the pressure because they, you know, basically they expend all their energy early on. The thing is, Randy Brown is not one of those fighters that goes for the finish early on. Randy Brown is a guy that just likes to pick you apart at range for the whole fight. And Randy Brown is coming off of a win over Brian Battle. That was a robbery. Battle got his hand raised, but it was one of the most atrocious robberies from this year. Battle did absolutely nothing in that fight. Randy Brown pieced him up, and then they gave it to Battle because Battle is the more hyped up prospect, and, you know, Battle gets on the mic and yells, "I'm the butcher." And I like Brian Battle, but he lost that fight. Randy Brown's been looking really good. The last loss that he has, last real loss that he has, was to Jack Della Maddalena. Out of his last 8 fights, he's won 7 of them, because I don't count the Battle fight as a loss for him. And Nicolas Dalby tested Renat Fakhretdinov. Lost, but tested him and started taking over as the fight went on. This is interesting, man, because if you do look at the way that Randy Brown struggled against Battle, despite the fact that he should have won that fight, it was in the clinch exchanges. It was Brian Battle, you know, sort of weighing on Randy Brown up against the fence, putting his weight on him because, you know, he's a former middleweight. He's a little bit bigger in the cage. And I could see Nicolas Dalby just wrestling and shooting takedown after takedown and tiring out Randy Brown and eventually getting him down. And in the Aleski Dos Santos fight, which was actually kind of competitive, Aleski Dos Santos took Randy Brown down a couple times. On paper, Nicolas Dalby should win this fight. I think Nicolas Dalby's also very tough, and he's actually got some underrated speed. But he's 40 years old. And the last time I picked a 40-year-old who had been doing better towards the end of their career, or at an old age, I should say. The last time I picked an old guy that was improving the older they got to beat someone that was like relatively young was, what's his name? Not Felipe Dos Santos, dude. It was the Grant Dawson fight when Dawson fought. Dude, I always get this guy's name wrong. I always have these moments with this one fighter at lightweight. The guy that Mateusz Gamrot finished with a knee up. Fucking hell, dude. This is so annoying. These people like Aleski Dos Santos. He's one of these 3-name, first-name Brazilians, dude. Carlos Diego Ferreira. All right. The last time I picked one of these old heads that was looking amazing in their late 30s was Carlos Diego Ferreira, coming off of the best performance of his entire career against Mateusz Raumbetsky. And I picked him to beat Grant Dawson, and Grant Dawson took him down easily and freaking beat his ass, basically. Didn't really beat his ass, but took him down easily, had a really easy fight. And Diego Ferreira, for the first time, starts looking old. So I'm worried that if I go with Nicolas Dalby, this is going to be the fight where he's chinny, and he's going to get pieced up, and he's not going to have the physicality, and he'll finally be old. So you know what? I'm going to go with Randy Brown. I think Randy Brown is the safe pick. I think Randy Brown's underrated. I think that he's actually looking better than ever. Back in the day, Randy Brown was a pitter-pat, toothpick, strikes at range type of fighter, but now he's putting more sting on his shots. In his last fight, he was throwing some really nasty combinations, digging to the body of Brian Battle and landing big shots upstairs, and Brian Battle has a really good chin. I think Randy Brown's going to win this one by decision. I think he'll probably lose the third round. But I think early on, I think he'll piece up Nicolas Dalby, win on damage, and he doesn't have the worst gas tank, Randy Brown, right? He doesn't expend a lot of energy trying to look for a finish, so he's one of these guys that can go a hard 15 minutes, and Nicolas Dalby, even though he has a chance to totally wash out Randy Brown, I think Brown has enough experience. He's crafty enough to be able to go in there and not throw everything into the first round. So I'll go with Randy Brown by decision. I think Nicolas Dalby will look old this time. I mean, you can't just keep getting better at an old age. And even though he lost his last fight to Renat Fakhretdinov and still looked good, it's a different stylistic matchup. Renat's someone that has to close the distance, and he's going to get tired in the wrestling exchanges. And at the end of the day, he's still fucking lost. So I'll go with Randy Brown. Michel Pereira versus Abus Magomedov. This is interesting, man, because Michel Pereira has an atrocious gas tank, but so does Abus Magomedov. Two of the worst gas tanks in UFC history right here. Abus is coming off of a submission against Bruno Ferreira, which is very impressive because I, along with a lot of other people, picked Bruno Ferreira to knock him out. But he weathered the storm, got the submission. He's a skilled grappler. People forget, man, he took down Sean Strickland and he took his back for like a few seconds. And he's got the OV. All right, I know he's one of these long, lanky strikers, but he's got that OV and he can grapple, and Michel Pereira's weakness is the grappling. The thing is, though, will Michel Pereira put Abus Magomedov away? Now, Michel Pereira in the first round is extremely dangerous, and even though he got finished against Anthony Hernandez and he got completely dominated and destroyed after the first round against Hernandez, Hernandez is one of the toughest fighters in that division. He's one of these, nicknamed Fluffy. He's one of these fluffy, skinny, fat, Mexican fighters that is super tough, super durable in the heavier weight classes. Just, you can't put him away. Michel Pereira did everything in his power to put him away. Big body shots, big front kicks up the middle, and Anthony Hernandez just takes it, eats it like a Tic Tac, and then eventually dominates the rest of the fight because, he's a great wrestler with ridiculous cardio. Abus Magomedov is not a good wrestler with ridiculous cardio. He's a decent wrestler with decent jiu-jitsu, with good striking. But I'm going to go with Michel Pereira. I don't think Abus Magomedov is going to have the toughness and the gas tank to deal with it, because not only does Anthony Hernandez have crazy toughness, but he also has a really good gas tank. So he can take those body shots early, take punishment, and recover because of how good his cardio is and how in shape he is. Abus Magomedov never has good cardio. I'm going with Michel Pereira to finish Abus Magomedov in the first round. He's just a killer in the first, man. At middleweight, he's so much faster than these other guys. He's so much more athletic than these other guys. Abus is kind of fast and kind of athletic early, but Michel Pereira is just a different level. Lighter man skill. Even though he's been at middleweight for a while now, he's still got that lighter man skill. Heavy hands at middleweight. He hits even harder at middleweight than he did back in the day. So I'm going to go with Michel Pereira first round KO. But if this goes late, I think Abus could take over. However, even if this gets out of the first round, it's not like Abus Magomedov is this crazy pressure wrestler that Anthony Hernandez was, and he's going to be able to put the same pace on him. No, he'll be tired too, and he won't be putting a crazy pace on Michel Pereira. So if anything, Michel Pereira could even win the second round. So I'm going with Michel Pereira, lighter man skill, crazy power, more explosive than Abus. I think he'll get the KO in the first round. And I think the body shots are going to be there for him. So he'll get this one done. Giga Chikadze versus David Onama. This is a tough one to pick. David Onama's good. He's very good. He gets dropped a lot in his fights, though. He gets hurt a lot. And Giga Chikadze, even though he's got the head shape that looks like he can't take a punch, he's actually very durable. All right, he's got a good chin. Ate some big shots from Arnold Allen. Had that fight with Calvin Kattar where he got hurt once with like an elbow, but Calvin Kattar hit him with the kitchen sink, and Giga Chikadze, stayed standing for most of the fight, or for all of the fight, basically. I think it ended in a decision. Giga's tough. Now, Giga took a lot of time off after that Calvin Kattar fight, and when he came back, he looked kind of shitty against Alex Caceres, but against Arnold Allen, he looked very good. He looked real good against Arnold Allen. But as I'm watching the Arnold Allen fight back, it gets worse and worse for Giga Chikadze as the fight goes on and people start pressuring him, and that's the thing. Giga Chikadze is one of these fighters where he really likes to keep his distance and kick at range, and he puts a lot of power into his kicks. He's a very explosive kicker, and that takes a lot of energy out of you. And it just so happens to be the case that in every Giga Chikadze fight against someone that is a predominant boxer that's going to march forward like Calvin Kattar, Arnold Allen, in the early going of those fights, Giga is always really dangerous because he can keep them on the outside with his kicks, and an explosive kicking game will get the better of a boxing game, right? Early on, at least. But because he relies on his explosivity, he gets tired as the fight goes on, and it becomes easier for these heavy pressure boxers to start closing the distance, and Giga relies less on his kicks as fights go on. And if you look at his face and his body language in the beginning of a fight, towards the end of a fight, it's a completely different guy. First round against Arnold Allen, he wins the first round. Arnold only lands like a couple of good punches. Giga Chikadze piecing him up at range. At the end of the fight, Giga Chikadze has a bloody nose. He's huffing and puffing. He's wide-eyed. And, he's like trying not to get put up against the fence and teed off on. And he's panicking a little bit. And Arnold Allen is sort of beating him up. I think that David Onama, even though he gets dropped in a lot of his fights, okay, and he gets hurt and he gets wobbled. Again, Roberto Romero was able to hurt him bad in the first round. Nate Landwehr hurt him a bunch of times in their fight. He has a good gas tank, and he's super tough, right? He's gritty. So he can come back from those moments where he gets caught, he gets hurt. I think he's going to get this one done, man. Giga Chikadze is 36 years old, I believe. He's not looking that old. He's still decent, but I could see Giga Chikadze dropping David Onama in the first round. But do I see him putting him out cold? I don't know. It's possible Giga Chikadze could walk David Onama onto a head kick and knock him out. But I think we're going to see Giga win the first round. I think he's going to hurt David Onama. I think he's going to dominate the first round, and David Onama is going to look for a takedown, and I don't think he's going to get it. But as the fight goes on, David Onama, gritty fighter, he can impose his will. I think that he'll start beating up Giga Chikadze, and like Arnold Allen, he has thud, he has power. He's got really good pocket boxing. He can hurt people, and I think that he's going to start beating up Giga Chikadze and mixing in the takedowns. And even though Giga has worked on his takedown defense after the Calvin Kattar fight, and it's gotten better, we didn't really see Arnold Allen shoot that many takedowns after the first round against Giga. So it's not like he really tested it when Giga was tired. But David Onama, if you look at his past couple of fights against Jonathan Pierce, he out-grappled Jonathan Pierce, who's a really good grappler, right? He was able to take down Roberto Romero a bunch of times at the end of their fight. He has good grappling. I think he's going to win this via decision. Giga will get tired after the first round. David Onama will edge out the second. He'll win the third, mixing in some grappling, getting the takedown at the end of the third. And I think he's going to win this 29-28. Giga's best days are behind them. I no longer think he's in his prime. He's not washed, but I just think that these heavy pressure boxers that can mix in the takedown are just going to give him trouble in a decision fight. And I don't see Giga finishing David Onama, although it's possible. Let's get on to the next one. Anthony Hernandez. Anthony Smith versus Zhang Mingyang. I think Zhang Mingyang's going to knock out Anthony Smith in the first round. But it's not going to be KO that sends Anthony Smith flying across the octagon like we normally see. Zhang Mingyang has that wicked power. He's got those angry man's elbows that sends people flying. But Anthony Smith, despite the fact that we've seen Smith get finished and we've seen him get hurt, we've seen him get wobbled by Khalil Rountree, there aren't many KOs where Anthony Smith just goes limp, right? He's got a very dense head, and it absorbs a shock really well to where even if you knock him out, he's never just going limp, going flying. I think Zhang Mingyang's going to hurt Anthony Smith and beat him into the ground, right? Like an angry man's elbow. Anthony Smith doesn't like it, and instead of going down immediately because he can absorb a shot, he starts sort of fumbling back, going up against the fence, showing that he's a little bit hurt, a little bit out on his feet, but not totally out on his feet. Zhang Mingyang will follow him up against the fence, tee off on him up against the fence. Anthony will start to crumble and fumble and tumble into the canvas, but not go out. He's going to shell up. Zhang Mingyang is going to start raining down big strikes while Anthony Smith is shelling up, and I think that's how this ends. It's going to be a typical Anthony Smith style of getting TKO'd where, again, he absorbs the shot well, but he'll get hurt and he'll sort of crumble rather than fall or get flatlined. And it's going to be sad. And this is Anthony Smith's last fight. And you know what? I don't want to see this fight because even though, you know, Smith has talked up a big game quite often in his career, I like Anthony Smith, and I don't want to see this guy get hurt, and I just don't understand why the UFC is sending him off like this. I get it. They're trying to build Zhang Mingyang, and they know Anthony Smith has a name, and they're using him as a stepping stone because they want Zhang Mingyang to get some popularity off of this. But I wish they did Anthony Smith versus, you know, another old, washed-up fighter, or just move him up to heavyweight and see if he can beat one of the bad heavyweights or something like that. The fact that they're doing him versus Zhang Mingyang, I think, is just, it's pathetic. I know this is how it's always been. This is how it's been for a long time, but I think the UFC needs to know the difference between, I not know the difference. They do know what they're doing, but I think the UFC can build prospects off of older fighters, but not in the retirement fight. That's what you do. Let's say Giga Chikadze loses to David Onama, and then he's 37 and he's looking a little older. Giga Chikadze's not totally washed up like Anthony Smith. It's not like he's coming off of 5 KO losses in a row. All right, then you do Giga Chikadze versus like an up-and-coming prospect. But when Giga Chikadze's coming off of 3 KO losses in a row and he's 40, put him up against another older fighter that's not easily going to decapitate him, right? I think that's what the UFC should do. I understand Anthony Smith versus like Vitor Petrino or whatever, but Anthony Smith versus Zhang Mingyang at this point, a little bit too much. He's going to get destroyed. Yes, it's possible that Anthony Smith could clamp down on a guillotine and Zhang Mingyang can run himself into it, but I just don't think that's going to happen. We know Smith doesn't offensively grapple. He has good jiu-jitsu, but he never shoots takedowns, and when he does, it's like when he's already been getting beaten up and he's getting tired, so it's not as effective, and his opponent will have a lot of confidence. So, yeah, I think that first round, I'd say 2 minutes into this fight, Zhang Mingyang is going to catch him with a really big shot, finish him in the first round with ground and pound up against the fence. I don't think Smith has a chance to win that. Let's get on to the next one. Main event. This fight is not as close as you guys may think. And what I mean by that is I think Carlos Prates has an easy win ahead of him. All right, listen. Carlos Prates has weird power because I watched Ian Garry's fights last night, a lot of the recent ones. I watched some of his recent fights. I watched the Shavkat fight. I watched his fight with Jeff Neal as well. Didn't really get too much into the weeds with the MVP fight because, you know, I know he didn't do anything against MVP on the feet and just had an easy takedown or whatever, but Ian Garry hasn't landed a single big punch in his last 2 fights. The biggest punch he landed on Shavkat was like the second round. He landed like a nice counter right hook in the clinch or something like that. He hasn't landed a single big punch in his last couple of fights. Not a single one. And I understand that Shavkat's dangerous and you got to be patient and all that. But Carlos Prates is dangerous, even more dangerous than Jeff Neal, and he's even more dangerous than Shavkat. And if Ian Garry, when he's in front of these heavy hitters, just relies on kicks to the knee and front kicks and snapping lead head kicks off the guard, which is what Ian Garry was doing a lot of kicks off of the guard. I don't think he's going in there against Carlos Prates slugging and having a thriller in Manila, right? I don't think he's having a Marty Lewis versus Big Bugsy type of fight where it's just going to be chaos. I don't think this is Muhammad Ali versus Frazier. I think this is going to be more like Ian Garry playing it safe at range, looking for the takedown attempts when the entries present themselves. And I just think that Carlos Prates, even though he's been submitted in his career before, he's worked on his takedown defense. And Neil Magny shot a bunch of takedowns, had gotten really close to getting the single leg. Like he had a high crotch, he was right on the verge of getting single legs. And Carlos Prates, his foot's like facing the ceiling and he's still able to get out of it. And he's still able to scramble out of those positions, stuffing every Magny takedown. And I know Ian Garry is younger than Magny. I know he's slicker. I know he's got good judo. So he's not just relying on the single leg. And I know he can get like a nice hip toss. But what are the chances that Ian Garry gets the submission? Now, here's the thing. He got awfully close to getting a submission over Shavkat, which was very impressive. Okay? He clearly has very dangerous jiu-jitsu because even though he didn't get the finish against MVP, even though he didn't get the finish against Shavkat, he was damn near on the verge of it. And he's working with Damian Maia. He's working with Charles Oliveira. He could very well get it, okay? He's got a great back take. I'm not saying he can't win this fight. I'm just saying that I think that on the feet, he's going to get destroyed. Not every second. Ian Garry's good at keeping distance. He's fast. He is good. He's a smart fighter. He's actually got a good chin. Ian Garry has a good chin. He can take a big punch. Took some big punches off of Shavkat. Even Jeff Neal landed some. But I think his chance to win this fight is by taking Carlos Prates down and submitting him. Because even if he doesn't get the submission and he can get takedowns, if he can't finish Carlos Prates on the ground, I think there are going to be long periods of time where they're on the feet. And when I say Carlos Prates is weird power, this is why I'm confident that Carlos Prates wins this fight. If he had regular knockout power, I'd probably go with Ian Garry because I would say Garry has a good chin. He can keep this at distance. He could survive on the feet, do okay on the feet, and get the takedown, get close to a submission. I trust in his grappling. Carlos Prates' power is like absurd. He's dropping Neil Magny before the KO where he grazes Neil Magny with his elbow. He's dropping Neil Magny with like a flimsy jab. Against Li Jingliang, dropped Li Jingliang all over the deck, had him flopping all over the deck like a fish. The first time he knocked down Li Jingliang was with like a flimsy jab that barely connected. This guy has like weird KO power that puts people to sleep. And when he hits you clean with the left hand, they start doing the chicken dance. Okay? And he's a long, rangy striker. Ian Garry is 6'3", Carlos Prates is 6'1". Gary's going to have the height advantage, but let's look at the reach. Carlos Prates has a 3.5-inch reach advantage, so he's going to have the reach advantage. They're basically going to be able to land on each other. But Prates is just so dangerous, and I'm not used to seeing this level of power with the long rangy style, and he's able to sneak the left hand in there without telegraphing it, and he can kick at range with you, and he's got a weird ability to like Anderson Silva out of nowhere. You don't know what's coming, and he kicks you in the face or he knees you to the solar plexus. He's like a sniper with absurd power. You watch the knockdowns that he's getting on these guys. It's like he whiffs people with air and they look like they're fumbling and bumbling over themselves. Watch back the Neil Magny fight. Watch back the Li Jingliang fight. He's got weird power, and I'm not overrating it. I think he has some of the nastiest power we've seen in the welterweight division's history. He's barely touching these guys, and they're getting hurt badly. And then he's sleeping Neil Magny, putting him to sleep, barely grazing him with a right hand. He's going to land on Ian Garry. Ian Garry does get hit. He's susceptible to getting hit with straight punches. Shavkat hit him with a bunch of good straight punches in their fight. I think it's only a matter of time in this 5-rounder If Ian Garry does not choke out Carlos Prates, which he can choke him out and he can get the finish. I don't deny that. If you're able to get that close to finishing Shavkat and MVP, he's clearly able to do it to Carlos Prates. I get it. But I think Carlos Prates has really nothing to worry about on the feet. I know Garry could knock him out. He's skilled. He's capable of knocking people out. But against these high levels of competition, he's really not taking any risks. When I say he didn't land a single big punch on Shavkat, I mean it. He landed some jabs and some good kicks with good sting on them every now and then, but really not committing to any punches. Against Jeff Neal, really not committing to any punches. Against MVP, did nothing on the feet. This is not the same free-flowing and high-output boxer, kickboxer that we saw on the come-up where Garry was lighting people up, jabbing and jabbing and jabbing. This is ole, 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 ole. Ian Garry is turning into a O2 Arena, Bellator, overseas in the UK type of fighter on the feet against these big punchers. And he's saying that he's going to go in there and, decapitate Carlos Prates and all that. He's good. It's going to be harder for Carlos Prates to land than it was against Li Jingliang. I get that. But Neil Magny's tough to hit. How many times have we seen Neil Magny, who's one of these lanklets at 170 with a long reach? He's a tricky customer. He's not dangerous on the feet, but it's just like, it's kind of tough to just be able to close the distance and punch him, right? Because he's always clinching when you're closing the distance. And at range, he can flick his flimsy kicks at you. Carlos Prates had no issue punching Neil Magny. He can play the range game. He will land the right hand. He will land the jab. He will land the straight left. And I think he knocks out Ian Garry. I think that Garry has a very good chin. I think he's very durable. But I think that Carlos Prates has the heaviest hands in this division. And he's long and rangy. And he's a creative striker. And I think he is the one guy that I can trust to be able to KO someone like Ian Garry who plays it safe on the feet because of his ridiculous power. Yeah, it's not going to take much to hurt Ian Garry, okay? Because Carlos Prates' power is just ridiculous. So I'm going to pick Carlos Prates to win this fight by a second round KO. Maybe Ian Garry takes him down at the end of round 1, gets close to a submission but doesn't get it. Round 2, Carlos Prates stuffs a takedown. I really hope we don't see a smudge fest, clinch fest, because it's very possible. Not saying Ian Garry is a smudge fest type of fighter. I'm not saying that at all, but he's going to get hit with some shots that are going to make him want to do nothing but grapple. And it could be difficult to take down Carlos Prates, and we could see Ian Garry just hold him up against the fence, and I really hope we don't see that. It's possible that we see that. So, yeah, I'm just hoping that we see some bit of a fight here, no matter who wins. Some bit of a fight. But I got to go with Prates, man. This guy is just ridiculously dangerous. He has the X factor. He has the power. He has the creativity. He has the shot selection. He has the patience. And he has decent takedown defense and decent cardio. So, Carlos Prates, second round KO. Garry could submit him, but I'm picking Carlos Prates. I think on the feet, it's clear as day. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Until next time.